This is a first holding a book while holding the mic. I think I could get away with using the camera mic, but I figured I have this on hand, so I might as well utilize it. But yeah, as you can see, Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders is a 2017 novel of a lot of significance because it won the 2017 Booker Prize, I believe. I'm not too in the know about prizes and literary stuff like that, of quite esteemed stuff like that. But yeah, it has gained a lot of kind of more polarizing people. I have tried to look a little bit into it because reading it was tough, and I came into it kind of like I have a lot of, especially this year since I've tried to read so much, cramming it in, which is not a good. I'm not advocating that for that way of reading, but because of that, I read this quite maybe the wrong, not with the best kind of mindset. Well, maybe not mindset, but the way I went into it, because it's an experimental novel, and it's told in Bardo, which I was kind of in the know of what that was. Bardo is a Jewish kind of variety of the afterlife, but it is like a purgatorial kind of state between when someone's still clinging to something in real life, and because of that kind of not dharmic suffering, but suffering because of that kind of suffering and clinging, that maybe some of that is allotted by the bad karma that you've accumulated throughout your life, and because of that you're not ready to go into the full on afterlife of heaven. So Bardo is like a kind of purgatory where you're staying there kind of clinging on to these things, and unless you let those go, and you die. If you die, kind of the general state is if you die and you're not fully let go of these things, then you might carry them on into the other life. So yeah, that is kind of my summation of it. Poor summation of it, but the concept of that kind of rings throughout as a underlying motif, stringing all these characters together. And I did watch George Saunders himself talking about. There's a really great breakdown that he did. If you just look up, he says, I think it's How to Read Lincoln in the Bardo, and he talks about, how he wrote the book and what, going into it, you don't want to, because he said, people at book signing and people who meet him are some people are I love the book, and then other people are I gave up after 30 pages, and I won't lie, it was slightly tempting at some points where I was do I want to, and then I heard different people saying read the audiobook, and then I was just things, because I am reading a lot more audiobooks these days, and obviously just to kind of, because I'm, I'll be listening to an audiobook, one at a time, obviously, and then I'll be reading, kind of maybe 2 or 3 other books, in kind of abreast at the same time. And what will happen is but I should have done that with this, I think, going into it. But some people say the audiobook is much better, so I might listen to it again. But this was the only other thing I read by Saunders was Pastoralia, which was a pretty interesting kind of almost Pynchon-esque. It's been I think Vonnegut is he has an interesting kind of. I did listen to one Sam Harris interview with him, which is pretty interesting. I think it was pretty recent, actually, earlier this year. And he was saying that anyone from Chekhov to the classics kind of Russian literature, Gogol, Chekhov, I think he said Daniel Carnes, which I have done his one review of his Today I Wrote Nothing, and I loved it. I thought it was really a perfectly balderdash in kind of Dadaist. But aside from that, I have only read Pastoralia, in that it was kind of more of a vision of kind of a rural bucolic landscape out. I don't know if it's where it's set exactly, but it's these. It's a really interesting kind of clash with the familiar and the mundane, or the familiar, mundane, and the hyper real, surreal kind of landscape. But it's it is rooted in realism in the sense that like Pynchon will be describing something really just outlandish through the lens of the banal, something or like that, or maybe it's the other way around. But like this, there's like interesting stuff of like someone being haunted by their grandmother, and then another character kind of being it had something to do with like cornflakes or something, through oatmeal or cornflakes or something. It was a brand. It was kind of an interesting way of putting the brand in there, kind of the way that Murakami introduces the KFC guy and the Jack Daniel or character mascot talking these great kind of philosophical things through that mundane mascot. So that's what I'm always keen on, the magic realism of events. But this was more. This tells, so I think with Lincoln in the Bardo, it tells the through the kind of fractured lens, the basically, so the first page, it's told it's using different, in one sense maybe it is good that I read it like this, and I think that's maybe, that, in hindsight, realizing that the typeset is important to this, so it's like, in a way, this reminded me of some of the stuff by Mark Z. Danielewski in this, like in the way that the medium that's being used, like the typeface and the typeset or whatever. I think it's called ergonic literature. That kind of medium is being utilized, and the narrative is being expressed through a fractured kind of lens, which I really like. So when he says the first thing we get is a narrator. That you're not primed into on who it is until like later. But on the first page it is, on our wedding day I was 46. She was 18. Now I know what you're thinking. Older men, not thin, somewhat bald, lame in one leg, teeth of wood, exercise the marital prerogative, thereby mortifying the poor young. And then he stops there and he's like, but that is false. This is exactly what I refuse to do, you see. On our wedding night I clumped up the stairs, face red with drink and dance, found her arrayed in some thinnish thing on her, and forced her into the silken fluttering tight slightly with her quaking, and could not do it. Speaking to her softly, I told her my heart, she was beautiful. I was old, ugly, used up. This match was strange, but it had its roots not in love, but expedience. Her father was poor, mother ill. So right enough that gives you a kind of glimpse into the time frame, and later this man is revealed to be Hans Wollmann. So you see that, I think Saunders says that, okay, now you're seeing, like, I don't know if you can see that literally there. He does a much better job explaining this, but yeah, he says Hans Wollmann, and then Roger Bevins III comes in. All those are spelled in lowercase, kind of just like, like out of nowhere, kind of. It is a little bit hard to kind of ascertain. That is probably the one, not even a criticism, but just kind of a fact, I guess, is like, it is kind of hard to apprehend the narrator and look at what's going on, like who's talking when, but that's where the fun arises, because I think great literature is meant to be reread and kind of calibrated. But yeah, so he's like, Roger Blevins comes in and he's like, efficacious, and then he's like, efficacious, yes, thank you, my friend, always a pleasure. And then he goes back and he's talking about here in my sick box, and I had to look that up. I was like, wait, what is a sick box? And it turns out a sick box is like, originated in the 1800s as a medical term, or maybe layman term as well. I think, although I admit I have not found a clear answer on it. There's no like Wikipedia on it, so maybe it's kind of a layman's term. But it is, I think, meaning all the stuff that a doctor or physician would put in a box for all the things that you need to be able to kind of have. So all the stuff like medicines and whatever. Or antiseptic, or whatever, to have the kind of organic kind of at-home remedies or stuff. So I think that's what it might be. I could be wrong. But yeah, so he's talking about sick books, and then so right off the bat you get kind of a glimpse into that, kind of thrust into the narration, and a lot of unreliable narrating here. So and then I thought this too. I thought that was because Lincoln of the Bardo is an interesting kind of thing. I thought it was going to be zeroing in on just Lincoln in like this, and I thought like, okay, that's a bit interesting. I didn't know if this was. I came into it not knowing if it was going to be a historical, like kind of like fantastical / historical novel, historical fiction where it's just taking a moment of Lincoln's life in the time, and but then it turns out the character that I thought that Hans Volman is revealed to be, I thought was going to be Lincoln. So that was kind of interesting, that switch, where it's like, wait a second. And then I looked up, and then Saunders also addressed this as well when he was saying, like, people are like looking up Lincoln to see if he actually did have an 18-year-old wife, and I was like, and I was like, wait a second, Mary Child Lincoln was not 18. It was just like the historical facts, but that's kind of what it is. It's like a blend. If anything, the main driving force is like not even factual historical reality of just like the fact of the matter, but it is the that's kind of like it only that only shows up like at first. It is a first and foremost, it's like a fantastical kind of phantasmagorical, surreal story through the lens of like with like a little bit of history kind of like being told, throws bits and pieces of history to like kind of put you back into context of like when these people died, and and they're all in Bardo together, and so Lincoln is seen in this novel but not in Bardo, so that's interesting. He's referenced in Bardo. You see a young man referenced later, and you're wondering if that's Willie Lincoln's son, or I'm sorry, you're wondering if that's Abraham Lincoln's son, or Willie or Tad, the two sons that he had, and they both fell ill, and that's where the where Saunders got the inspiration was this particular time. I believe in 1862, kind of a year into the war. I could be wrong. It might have been 1863, but it was around that time when Lincoln's sons both fell ill. I don't know if it was typhoid fever or like some type of flu or fever. Definitely pretty serious for both of them, and Tad recovered and Willie didn't, and then he died at the age of 11. So you have this poor, very like this image of Lincoln in mourning, just like absolutely, just like torn apart, like it just completely obliterated by this devastating loss for him, and it's like very tragic, and that's really kind of interesting kind of thing, and in that sense that also reminded me a bit of Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, with this aspect of like the very Marco Polo, and talking to the I can't remember, like one of the that kind of historical blending with reality, or I'm sorry, with fiction, and you see the similar thing with this, where it's like all these souls are kind of in Bardo together, kind of trying to figure out a way of getting toward the bringing. That's the arc of it. That's why it's like I don't even know if it's possible to spoil this book, but because the arc of it is kind of like getting Willie Lincoln to get out of that place of where it's like the most miserable and the most kind of the worst for them, and then getting him to go to a place that's like nice and like serene, and where he's peaceable and better off, and they're all they all learn to work together in a way. So it's like an interesting kind of almost, I don't want to slap hero's journey on it, but it is a kind of archetypal journey in that sense of the soul, like to peace, finding peace and like letting go of doubts and qualms, and these are things that keep us in the state too, is like that regurgitating kind of purgatorial cycle of just self-referential. So you see Hans Volman is still stuck in that state. He's very much stuck in that, like maybe I married this person to, I did this, I married this person not out of love, and I'm, he's feeling that kind of like the utilitarian ways at the time, and that he's, kind of be stuck in that cycle of just kind of self-recriminating kind of, and then you see that too with like Roger Bevins is like kind of the more upbeat ones. He's very conversational. I think that's the guy. One of them has this sense of being able to like has everything that's like very this attuned sense of like everything is like very through the eyes, nose, and ears and mouth. All 5 senses are very heightened in the afterlife, because during his life he was very just like grab life by the horns and basically live it to its fullest and have experience as much as you can. So aptly in Bardo, that would be everything is so heightened to not excessive, but just like in the natural kind of conclusion of what would become of that, and he's like everything he's just like seeing and bright vibrant colors all the time. So that's kind of, I thought that was very interesting. And another one is so Hans Volman, Roger Bevins, and there's a woman there, and then there's the Reverend Everly Thomas, I think, and he's the kind of I think is later kind of that he's not all he says to be. Like he's a bit fraudulent. Like he's like posing himself as like a preacher that's kind of holier than thou, but in actuality he's like had his own kind of sowed his own wild oats in the matter, and that's kind of his that's kind of his cards that he has to play with in eternity. So he's all these people are trying to dice out and make sense of this in Bardo, and they're all, I guess, Willie Lincoln rolls around and he's stuck in Bardo too, and then because of that, he died in this state of of things being cut short, and partway right about then, there's a really unique kind of narrative tool also, using like real historical accounts of like the Lincolns in particular, just zeroing back in, focusing on them. And what I found with that was really unique was how there's all these different accounts of like Abraham Lincoln's very, what you would think are like very just factual, matter of fact material events, like like his eyes, for example. Some people say that Lincoln had blue eyes that were very kind of a dark, brooding, but kind of like what's the word? Like an icy kind of aqueous, aqueous kind of blue, or like a kind of like a, and then other people would say that they were gray, and then gray with a hint of green or something, and they couldn't get the actual, just some people said they were hazel, you get the point. Like everybody's kind of contending for this, and the interesting kind of thing is that like how memory kind of is a disservice. I think Nietzsche might have said something like memory is like memory says like I did that, and pride says like that didn't. Later pride comes along and kind of makes like kind of calibrates your memory to kind of fit your narrative. I mean, that's not exactly what he said. He put it much more eloquently, but that is kind of what you see as in history. Even like the most, what you would think are avowed kind of historians are kind of, that's you would think there would be holden to a standard, and not to say that all historians like that you should just doubt a historian. It's all subjective, but it does kind of paint a picture of like how impossible it is to get a one singular kind of like standard resolute for like how things should be, or how things should be looked at. So but yeah, then there's other things like like Lincoln was a big thing was the like a spectacle of the day was like the Lincolns and their apparent kind of nonchalance and kind of negligence about their parenting. Like you find that a lot of the historical accounts of them in the day say that Lincoln was very, very like lax and laid back parent. Like he would let Willie and Tad just kind of run around, and there's like a part of that where they're going in a little play for it and they're making it, and that he's just kind of letting them go rampant and like kind of like they'd get injured a little bit, and and I think that's kind of people would like. So in conclusion, Lincoln and the Bardo, there's obviously consistency issues here because you're probably seeing me with longer hair and longer facial hair, because it did take, this is a few days after I started the other two takes, so just an FYI. But yeah, I did want to leave off on just a quick quote, just to show kind of the pros and how, at first I think it's like kind of scattered, and it was a little bit hard to get into that kind of slight nonsensical, but also like kind of seemingly left field, but it all has a purpose. I think it's very purposeful. It's not just like he's, Saunders is trying to write like this just to kind of like tick you off, but it is a little bit challenging to get into the headspace, I guess. But I just want to give an example of, it seems like the paragraph breaks, and I think I mentioned that the text face or the typeface is consistently is not the same, but like you see different voices, and he explains that in his video, in the interviews, that like there's different, when other voices come in, like whether it's Roger Bevins or George or Hans Volman, who we hear from him first, so you get kind of an in media res, like thrust into the narrative kind of. So you're kind of you get a feel of like being mentally in Bardo with these other characters. but towards the end you get like more of a softer kind of, because they're kind of they're trying to help Willie Lincoln find rest, and so it says, this is like the last few pages, just now took the lantern out to Carroll Crypt, Tom, to make sure that all was well, and found young Lincoln's coffin slightly jutting out from the wall slot, and pushed it back into, oh, that poor little fellow, concluding his first ever lonely night there, out of many such lonely nights to come, and song came a long, sad eternity of such nights. Could not help but think of our Philip, around the same age as President's boy, who will be now racing about the yard and come and just positively lit up inside with the joy of living, having been flirting all over the fence and missing Amy and Reba Leonard next door. So you get kind of a little bit of a glimpse into what that, all the different, summation of all these different characters, and they all come to some. It's not all just a bunch of like wishy-washy for its own sake. But it is, but yeah, that is. I think I also mentioned about how, I hope the camera didn't turn off at that point, but that Willie Lincoln, the President Abraham Lincoln was kind of prone to being laid back and like quite relaxed about his, letting his kids, not really supervising them all too much. So that kind of, you get through that historical lens again. I should say, you get through this very subjective lens, the one view of history, kind of a one solid, kind of every once in a while to kind of root it back in place in reality, which is something I really like. But yeah, I think that's all I have for Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders, and that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching.